Frantz Fanon is a leading theorist of both racism and colonial power. He was on the front line in struggles against both fascism in Europe and colonialism in Africa, and his experiences as both a physician and a psychiatrist gave him a unique, if horrifying, vantage point to empirically examine what racism is, how it functions, and its deep psychological impact on individuals. Running throughout his work was one central mission, and that's encapsulated by his theory of disalienation. So what is this concept? In the Second World War, Fanon fought for Charles de Gaulle's Free French Army against the Nazi-collaborating Vichy regime, and during this time, Fanon witnessed intense racism among the French colonists living in Algeria, but also, even more dishearteningly for him, among his fellow soldiers in the Free French Army. So Fanon became disillusioned because even after victory in the struggle for which he was awarded a Bronze Star, he was still treated as a second-class citizen and subjected to racial discrimination. But more than that, Fanon saw how widespread and systemic this discrimination was, and so he set out to analyse racism empirically, examining the psychological effects of colonial subjugation on black people, and this became the basis for his first book, Black Skin, White Masks, but this was originally entitled An Essay on the Disalienation of the Black Man. This now lost and forgotten title I think is really insightful because this concept of disalienation runs throughout Fanon's work. It underlines how Fanon conceptualised racism as a form of alienation. Alienation in a nutshell is the experience of being separated from essential aspects of your humanity. It's in this way that Marx wrote about how work in a capitalist society obstructs workers from engaging in creative and meaningful work, something that he argued is an essential part of our human nature, and that consequently a truly free society would be one in which the work we do nurtures and strengthens rather than obstructs this aspect of our human nature. But another fundamental part of our human nature that Fanon focuses on is our need for social recognition. As social beings, we have an innate drive to be accepted by our larger social group. We pursue this throughout our lives by trying to fit in, developing skills that are highly valued in our communities, helping others, sharing our achievements, aligning with social norms, and engaging in social activities. And such striving for social recognition is now widely accepted across a range of disciplines as being a fundamental part of human nature. So being separated or obstructed from this is a classic case of alienation. And this is how Fanon theorised what was happening to black people in France and also colonised peoples all over the world. Fanon had built up an extensive experience of treating traumatised peoples, both as a physician and a psychiatrist, and his means of explaining much of this trauma was as a type of alienation produced by colonialism. For Fanon, colonialism was primarily an economic system, a system that extracts resources from colonised regions to enrich the colonisers, and this involves a lot of manpower, and so local peoples in colonised regions were exploited as a source of cheap labour, either paid or enslaved. But as with any economic system, these processes must be justified. The people involved must understand what they're doing and why, and this necessarily involves cultural and political institutions that organise and educate people in ways that facilitate the underlying economic system. In the case of colonialism, a culture developed that defined colonised subjects as inferior types of human beings and sought to eradicate their native cultures. Colonised subjects instead had to take on the culture of their coloniser, the beliefs, values, laws, norms and language. This was necessary if they were to function in their new roles as workers, bureaucrats, businessmen, etc. From the individual's point of view then, to navigate colonial society and gain any recognition as an individual, you must understand yourself and the world around you through the culture of the coloniser, a process that Fanon describes as taking on the white mask. Yet this very same culture defines you as an inferior type of human being, based solely on an arbitrary physical characteristic that you can do nothing about, your black skin. It's in this sense then that colonial subjects are alienated. They're obstructed from the fundamental part of their human nature, which is to gain recognition as an individual through and from their larger social group. And this is impossible for the colonised subject, someone who, as Fanon says, is necessarily a victim of a system based on the exploitation of a given race by another, on the contempt in which a given branch of humanity is held by a form of civilization that pretends to superiority. As a result, subjects of colonised societies develop an inferiority complex and a range of psychological problems, all stemming from this denial of their humanity, this alienation. Fanon's focus then, in Black Skin, White Masks, is to critique and assist in the dismantling of alienation. He talks about the road to disalienation, which he wants to highlight and advance. This, however, required a broader political project, indeed a revolutionary project, as it meant addressing the underlying economic processes that produce this alienation, and this was the focus of his next work, The Wretched of the Earth. There are many insights in The Wretched of the Earth, and I want to cover three briefly before returning to what I think is the main one. Firstly, Fanon presents highly prescient warnings about the pitfalls of decolonisation, stressing the need for a new political system that recognises all humans equally, what he calls new humanism. He warns about how the removal of colonial culture should not reopen the door for old ethnic and religious divisions. It should be forward-looking, modern and egalitarian. And tragically, many processes of decolonisation didn't manage to secure this, and old ethnic and religious divisions did return and lead to various horrors, including in some cases ethnic cleansing and genocide. Secondly, Fanon makes a convincing case for the historic role of the peasantry as a revolutionary class. This challenged many Marxists who played down the role of agricultural peoples and focused almost entirely on urban workers. Yet time and again, from China to Cuba, countries that led successful revolutions often occurred where the majority were peasants. Thirdly, Fanon talks very controversially about violence. He infamously refers to violence as a cleansing force. This is, as Peter Hudis concedes in his book on Fanon, not the strongest part of his analysis. Yet it's very important to remember the context here. Fanon is addressing people who may or are already engaging in armed struggle against inherently violent regimes that do not recognise their rights as human beings. And from France in the 1790s right through to South Africa in the 1990s, armed struggle has often been central to achieving these ends. For me, though, at least, the main thrust and insight of the book is that it's Fanon's roadmap to disalienation. The Wretched of the Earth is directly addressed to peoples involved in struggles for decolonisation. It's a less academic book, so Fanon doesn't talk using terms like disalienation. But when you read what he says about the psychological impact of freeing oneself from colonial power, this is exactly what he's talking about. He says, decolonisation never goes unnoticed, for it focuses on and fundamentally alters being, and transforms the spectator crushed to a non-essential state into a privileged actor, captured in the virtually grandiose fashion by the spotlight of history. It infuses a new rhythm, specific to a new generation of men, with a new language and a new humanity. Decolonisation is truly the creation of new men. The thing colonised becomes a man through the process of liberation. In other words, then, getting rid of the system that alienates you will liberate you and allow you to regain your humanity. And it's this argument that not only inspired colonised peoples of the 20th century, but continues to inspire people today. A lot of Fanon's theory was revived in the 2010s by those engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement. Just as Fanon did in the 1950s, these activists also wanted to properly understand racism, not just as a set of ignorant prejudices, but as a systemic and psychological mechanism that dehumanises the oppressed, internalising inferiority in one group while reinforcing the superiority of another. Yet, as Nigel Gibson writes in the preface to his recent book on Fanon, it's not only Fanon's theory of racism as alienation that remains important today. The brutal oppression of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank is reminding the world of ongoing systems of colonization and domination, while the ideology and actions of groups like Hamas also remind us of Fanon's warnings and the need for humanism to be at the heart of anti-colonial struggles. And it's not just in Palestine. From the Adivasis in India to the Guarani in Brazil, peoples all over the world are still experiencing the same forms of economic and cultural oppression that Fanon examined, emphasising the necessity to keep his teachings alive. Thanks for watching.